Hello there, and welcome to this special boring history episode on the rather disturbing lives of the people who cleaned themselves in the Middle Ages. Let me know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Make yourself comfortable. Dim the lights, breathe deeply, and let the stress of the day fade away like mist on a sleepy morning hillside. You're in no rush now. You don't need to be anywhere else but here, wrapped in calm curiosity, nestled under the gentle weight of a blanket or the soft press of silence. The world outside can wait. Tonight, we drift gently into a time long before warm showers and scented soaps, before plumbing curled like veins beneath the city, before even the idea of regular cleanliness as we know it. This is a story not of gleaming tiles and hot steam, but of wooden basins, smoke-darkened beams, and the peculiar rhythms of life when washing was a rare and deliberate act. The Middle Ages spanned roughly 1,000 years, a stretch of time as broad and shadowy as a forgotten forest trail. And during this time, how people cleaned themselves, and why, and when, and with what, was a story not just of hygiene, but of belief, of fear, of weather, of wealth, and of the slow turning of human habits. Imagine you're living in a small village around the year 1250. It is neither truly ancient nor recognizably modern. The road outside your home is packed earth, sometimes softened to mud by rain, sometimes frozen into ruts. The air smells of smoke from peat or wood fires, the damp musk of livestock, the occasional sweetness of fresh straw, and at times the more pungent reminders of people living close together without the benefit of sewers. Your home is small, made of wattle and daub, with a thatched roof and a floor that may be bare earth or scattered with rushes. These rushes, once fresh, now hold the traces of many days. Food crumbs, bits of herbs tossed in to sweeten the air, and the faint smells of spills and soot. There are no candles unless you're wealthy. Just a hearth, a few smouldering coals, and the quiet hum of life measured in seasons and chores. In such a place, cleaning oneself was an act both simple and complicated. To begin with, water was not always trusted. It is easy to imagine that a stream meant purity, that rainwater caught in barrels was safe, that lakes and wells were nature's gifts. But water carried risk, illness, chill, and unseen dangers. And so, washing was done carefully, often with intention, sometimes even with suspicion. There were public bathhouses in the Middle Ages, more than one might expect, especially in towns and cities. These were not the tiled steam rooms of Roman days, nor the polished spas of today, but wooden structures, often heated with stoves or coals, their air thick with the scent of damp wood and the human closeness of shared space. People came not just to wash, but to socialize, to rest, to treat illness, or simply to warm themselves during colder months. In some places, bathing was a weekly ritual, especially in regions influenced by the remnants of Roman tradition or Islamic customs. In other places, especially during times of war, plague, or harsh religious reform, it became rare. At certain times, people feared that bathing opened the pores to disease, especially during plagues. The act of washing instead of cleansing might be seen as dangerous, letting in the bad humours, the unseen poisons of the air. But even when people bathed less, they still cleaned themselves in small ways. You wake with the sun, or with the rooster's call. The hearth fire has died down to ash, and the morning chill lingers in the air. Water, drawn from a well or stream the night before, sits in a wooden bucket near the door. You might dip your hands in it, rub the sleep from your eyes, and splash a little onto your face. No soap, not yet. Just the cold bite of water and the rough drying with a homespun cloth. It is enough to feel a little more awake. Soap, when it is used, is not what we know today. It is made from animal fats and lye, often coarse and smelling of ash or herbs. In some places, especially in parts of the Islamic world or in southern Europe, people use olive oil-based soaps, gentler, smoother, even perfumed. In northern climates, the soap is harder, more caustic, and not always welcomed on delicate skin. Still, it is better than none, and a small bar might last a long time. Hair is brushed with wooden combs, often shared between family members, and checked often for lice. Vinegar or herbal infusions might be rubbed through the scalp. Lavender, rosemary, nettles, whatever the garden can offer. These herbs are not just fragrant. They are believed to protect, to heal, to chase away bad spirits or illness. Your clothing is not washed often. Instead, outer garments are aired, brushed and repaired. Linen, when you have it, is worn underneath, closer to the skin, and washed more frequently. This underlayer absorbs sweat and oils and can be scrubbed on wash days with river stones or paddle boards. It is laborious work and mostly done by women, their hands raw from cold water and harsh soap, their backs bent, their arms strong. Bathing, when it happens, is a process. A tub might be brought into the home, filled with water heated over the fire. If you are wealthy, you bathe alone, perhaps in a copper tub, with scented herbs or flowers floating on the surface. If you are poor, the bath is shared. A child goes, first, then the next, and the water grows darker with each turn. It is not glamorous, but it is human, familiar, intimate. Sometimes entire towns share a bathhouse, often segregated by sex or by time of day. You undress in a small room, hang your garments on pegs, and step into the steamy warmth. There are wooden benches, buckets, sometimes even attendants who scrub your back. People laugh, talk, whisper. The air smells of steam, of wet wool, of heated oils. For a moment, the hardships of daily life lift, carried away in the mist. But this comfort is not permanent. Over time, many bathhouses fall into disrepair. Others are shut down during plagues. Religious reformers warn against the dangers of immodesty and temptation in public bathing. And so, across centuries, the act of washing drifts from communal ritual to private chore, and then sometimes even to distant memory. In wealthier homes, a private chamber might be set aside for washing. A ewer and basin rest on a carved table. A servant pours warm water over your hands or feet. Linen towels, folded and sweetened with lavender, await your touch. The nobility has access to perfumes, to rosewater, to alum and beeswax balms. But even they do not wash daily. It is a ritual of preparation for feasts, for religious services, for marriage, not an everyday expectation. In monasteries, cleanliness is both practical and spiritual. Monks rise early, wash in silence, and move through their days with an attention to order. Their cloisters are cleaner than the world outside, and their hands, often stained with ink or soil, are washed before meals, after labour, and during prayers. Cleanliness here is not vanity. It is humility, discipline, the imitation of divine order. In the countryside, far from cities or monasteries, cleaning is slower, simpler. Rainwater barrels stand outside homes, their surfaces often covered with wooden lids or cloths to keep out insects. Leaves are used to strain the water. Children bathe in streams during summer. In winter, they make do with damp cloths, rubbed across faces and arms while standing near the fire. And then there are remedies, folk, traditions passed down like heirlooms, a paste of ashes and water for scrubbing feet, a rinse of apple cider vinegar for oily hair, dried rosemary hung over beds to ward off lice, mint boiled into tea, not for drinking, but for rinsing the mouth, charcoal rubbed over teeth. These are not oddities, but lifelines, whispered wisdom from grandmothers and neighbours, stitched into the rhythm of rural life. You might have imagined the Middle Ages as a time of filth and stink, and in some ways you would not be wrong. But in other ways it was a world filled with quiet attempts at grace, rituals of rinsing, brushing, oiling, tending. The effort to stay clean was not abandoned. It was just shaped by the materials and fears of the time. And always there was scent. The smell of sweat, yes, and smoke, but also the scent of thyme crushed between fingers, the sharpness of vinegar, the musk of tallow soap, the sweetness of lavender tucked into pillows, the resinous sharpness of pine scattered on the floor. People cleaned with what they had, and often they had more than we might expect. As night settles in again, and the sounds of a medieval village soften into the hush of dark, you can almost hear the faint rustle of linen against skin, the splash of water into a wooden basin, the sigh of someone settling into sleep on straw or feather, freshly washed or simply at peace with the day's labours. The fire is low now. Only the softest glow of embers remains, casting warm flickers across the wooden walls of your medieval home. Outside, the wind carries the distant howl of a fox, or perhaps the creak of a swaying tree. You're safe beneath, your roof wrapped in the quiet hush of a night without clocks or electricity, where time drifts like smoke, and sleep comes not by force, but by gentle surrender. Inside this old world, the act of cleaning oneself continues, not with haste, not with sparkle and shine, but with the patient rhythm of need, season, and belief. Last night we wandered the broad outlines of medieval washing, the cautious use of water, the bathhouses that once hummed with life, the herbs and soaps crafted by hand. But there's more to explore. Let us return to that distant place and pick up the thread again, gently, slowly, like slipping into a warm basin on a cold morning. You stir before dawn, as many people once did. Light doesn't spill through curtains. It seeps in slowly through oiled parchment or gaps in the wooden shutters. You rise with the faint chill of the early hour and make your way to the water bucket. It's cold, and you hesitate for a moment before dipping your hands in. No one else is awake yet. The village is still, the kind of stillness that has no rival in the modern world. Your fingers curl around a cloth, coarse linen, the kind used for wiping faces and hands. You wet it, wring it out, and press it to your face. The sensation is bracing, but it wakes you in a way that feels honest. No caffeine, No alarm, just cold water and the whisper of day beginning again. This is what many did. Those without the luxury of bathhouses or copper tubs. Most cleaning was done piecemeal, just enough to feel refreshed. Full-body baths, when they happened, were occasional. But hands and faces, those were cleaned more regularly. They were the parts that met the world, that touched bread and passed greetings, that received dust and soot and the small wear of life. In monasteries, where silence reigned and the days were marked by bells, cleanliness followed a rhythm all its own. Before each meal, monks would line up at the lavatorium, a long stone trough with running water. They washed in silence, using small cloths or their bare hands, then dried on communal towels hung nearby. It wasn't glamorous, but it was consistent. Cleanliness here was an act of spiritual discipline, washing away not just dirt, but distraction. Among peasants, the rituals were simpler. Water was drawn by hand, carried from wells or springs in wooden buckets that sloshed with every step. Heating it meant building a fire, waiting, tending, stirring. For this reason, warm water was precious. It might be reserved for the youngest child, the sick, or for special occasions. Washing the body in winter was not only difficult, it was dangerous. Catching a chill could mean weeks of illness or worse. So many turned to dry methods. Dry washing was a thing. Dusting powders made from ground herbs, fine clays, or even ashes were used to absorb oils and odour. Afterward, the skin might be brushed or wiped with cloths. Hair, too, could be treated this way, sprinkled with rosemary powder, or combed through with sharp-toothed combs to remove lice and dirt. Vinegar rinses helped, as did tinctures of nettle or sage. These solutions were passed from mother to daughter, neighbour to friend. They smelled of the earth and the garden, not the perfume bottle. If you were wealthy, truly wealthy, you had access to more refined tools of cleanliness. Your home had servants who heated water, carried it, poured it. Your linens were laundered more frequently. You may have had perfumes, hand-milled soaps from Castile, even imported combs made of bone or ivory. But still, you bathed far less than we do today. Even kings bathed sparingly. Cleanliness was relative. A fine linen shirt, fresh herbs tucked into the sleeves, and perhaps a rinse of the hands and face. That was often enough. Medical theory played its role too. The body, people believed, was ruled by humours: blood, phlegm, black bile and yellow bile. These humours could be disturbed by extremes, including excessive washing. Baths, especially hot ones, were seen to open the pores and make the body vulnerable to miasmas, those invisible vapours blamed for illness, and so many learned to clean cautiously. A warm bath might be followed by hours of bundling up to close the pores. In times of plague, people even avoided water entirely, fearing it might carry disease. But fear didn't mean abandonment. People adapted. They wiped, they brushed, they combed. Clothing was layered to protect the skin, and when garments were laundered, it was a full-day affair. In villages, women gathered at rivers with wooden paddles, beating clothes against flat stones. In towns, washhouses offered shared space for scrubbing and rinsing. Soaps were made by hand, boiled from animal fat and lye, sometimes with ash or chalk added. It wasn't pretty, But it worked. Inside homes, bathing might involve little more than a foot tub and a cloth. Warm water for the feet was especially important, believed to draw down the humours and promote rest. You might sit by the hearth, feet soaking, while someone combed your hair or rubbed your back with warmed oil or vinegar. There's something tender in that, a quiet intimacy that speaks more to care than to cleanliness. Children were washed more often. Their skin was sensitive, their needs greater. A mother might strip her child near the hearth, pour a little water into a basin, and wipe them down with gentle hands. She would dry them with soft cloth, wrap them in linen, kiss their forehead. These small rituals, repeated every few days, wove a thread of love and health through the home. In cities, as they grew, bathhouses took on new roles. In parts of Europe, especially in Germany, Italy and the Low Countries, bathhouses remained popular well into the late medieval period. They were places to cleanse, yes, but also to eat, relax, even conduct business. Some bathhouses offered food and drink alongside tubs and towels. Others, sadly, became associated with vice, and their reputations declined. But for a while, they remained spaces where the act of cleaning was also social. Imagine a cold autumn evening in a city like Nuremberg. Smoke curls from tiled chimneys. The cobbled streets are slick with rain, and inside the bathhouse, warm light spills through shutters. You enter, greeted by the scent of damp wood and rosewater. A towel is offered. You undress behind a wooden screen and step into a hot tub of water, heated with firestones. Around you, other figures rest, speak quietly, soak. The air is thick with warmth, and for a moment the noise of the city fades. You are clean. You are still. That moment of stillness, of stepping outside the grind of daily work and into a slower, cleaner space, was precious. Not everyone could afford it, and not all towns had such places, but when they did, they mattered. For those few hours, people shed not just clothes, but burdens, worries, aches, and as the centuries moved on, so did the habits. The Renaissance brought new ideas about the body, the skin, and the importance of hygiene. But still, daily bathing was rare. Cleanliness was pursued in small ways. Hands rinsed before prayer, faces washed before visits, hair combed with care, clean linen worn with pride. There's something deeply human in all of this. The Middle Ages were not an age of filth, though there was dirt. They were an age of adaptation. People did what they could. They scrubbed when it was safe. They wiped when it was cold. They scented their clothes, brushed their hair, washed their feet. They lit candles, warmed water, and gave each other comfort in the simple act of care. Tonight, as the wind curls around your windows and the night deepens, you might imagine that you, too, are part of that world. A cloth warmed by the fire, a basin of water carried with care, the scent of rosemary on your sleeves, the hush of a world where time moved slowly, and cleaning oneself was not a rush, but a ritual. The night outside lingers, velvet black and cool, wrapping the world in a quiet you can almost touch. Somewhere in the distance, a dog may bark once, then fall silent. A breeze stirs the trees. In this calm, timeless hush, you sink deeper into the folds of sleepiness, your body softening as we return once more to the slower, simpler world of the Middle Ages. Tonight, we step deeper into the heart of medieval cleanliness, where habits were shaped not just by practicality, but by weather, customs, social rank, and belief. The act of cleaning oneself was not uniform, not even across a single country. It changed from village to village, from manor to monastery, from warm southern hills to cold northern forests. And so, we follow these differences, like soft footprints through snow, listening for the quiet ways people sought to live just a little cleaner, a little more comfortably, in a world without plumbing or pasteurized soap. Let us begin with the seasons. In the summer months, washing was easier. Warmer water from sun-warmed streams, quicker drying clothes on lines stretched between trees or posts. Children swam in rivers, women bathed babies outdoors, and men washed after long days in the fields with buckets poured over their heads. The warm sun and longer days made washing more frequent. A face might be rinsed in the morning, a shirt soaked and scrubbed in the afternoon, and hands wiped before evening meals. But in winter, everything slowed. Water had to be broken from ice. Heating it took precious wood. The chill made undressing dangerous, especially in stone buildings where heat did not linger. And so, routines adapted. Instead of full baths, people focused on parts, washing the face and hands, perhaps the feet, near the fire, while the rest of the body stayed swaddled in wool. A cloth warmed by coals might be used to gently wipe the skin. Warm oils replaced water, and drying was done with care, using rough linen or wool towels, pressed and patted rather than rubbed. Even the rich adapted this way, though they had the means to warm entire rooms or keep servants tending fire and tub. Even noblemen and ladies thought twice before submitting themselves to the bitter draughts of winter bathing. It wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival, though. Sheshig, world outside the home-shaped cleanliness within it. In muddy regions, boots and cloaks were removed before entering. In drier regions, dust was the constant enemy, settling on skin, in clothes, in hair. People brushed themselves often. A stiff-bristled brush, or even a handful of straw or reeds, might be used to beat dust from a cloak or tunic. Clothes were shaken out in the open air, and the floors of homes, whether dirt, stone, or wooden plank, were swept with bundled twigs tied into brooms. Cleanliness began with the environment. A cleaner house meant a cleaner body. And it wasn't only about dirt. Odour, too, played a role. People in the Middle Ages were acutely aware of smell. Not because they were dirtier, but because smell was thought to carry sickness. Foul air meant foul humours, rottenness, decay, filth. These weren't just unpleasant. They were dangerous. So, people scented their lives with herbs. In wealthier homes, bundles of dried lavender, rose petals and rosemary were tucked into chests and wardrobes. They were sewn into linen pouches and hung around the neck. In poorer homes, rushes scattered on the floor were sometimes mixed with mint or sweet flag. When trodden underfoot, these released soft green scents, a kind of medieval air freshener. People washed their hands often, before meals, after relieving themselves, and during illness. Soap, as we've said, was coarse and homemade in many cases, but its use was common, not necessarily on the whole body, but certainly for the hands, which were the main point of contact between people and their world. There is a kind of tenderness in imagining these routines. A woman heating water slowly over a fire, dipping cloth into the steaming basin and wiping down her child with strokes full of care. A man returning from the fields, soaking his feet in a small tub, eyes closed, a sigh escaping as the aches of the day drift away with the warmth. A monk scrubbing, the palms of his hands in a stone basin, the splash echoing in the cold, echoing halls of a silent abbey. A noblewoman rinsing her face with rosewater, then patting it dry with soft linen before slipping into bed beneath heavy furs. Sleep and cleanliness were linked even then. Foot washing was especially common at day's end. In Christian tradition, it had spiritual meaning, tied to humility and care. In daily life, it was practical. Dirt, cold, and soreness were banished before bed. In monasteries, foot washing was often done in pairs, one monk washing another's feet in a quiet moment of service. In homes it was done by mothers, by wives, by servants. A basin, a towel, a slow, soothing rhythm, no rush. Tooth cleaning was a lesser known, but still present part of medieval hygiene. People used chewed twigs, often from trees like hazel or willow, to scrape the teeth. Charcoal powder, mixed with salt or herbs, was rubbed onto the enamel to clean and freshen the breath. Mouth rinses included vinegar or wine with mint. It wasn't universal and it wasn't scientific, but it was done. People cared. They noticed when their breath was unpleasant. They reached for remedies as best they could. The nails were trimmed with knives. Ears were cleaned with cloths wrapped around fingers. Eyelids were wiped gently when needed. People used the means they had. A small piece of linen, a handful of warm water, a drop of vinegar, and always herbs for scent, for healing, for protection. The belief in cleansing extended to spiritual life too. Baptism was not only symbolic, it was cleansing. Pilgrimages often involved ritual washing before entering sacred spaces. Before prayer, hands were washed. Before communion, fasting and bodily purity were encouraged. Cleanliness was not just for health or social acceptance. It was a way to approach the divine. In fact, one might say that for many medieval people, cleanliness was less about looking good and more about being good. Good before God, good before one's neighbours, good before oneself. Still, despite their efforts, the world they lived in could be overwhelming. There were no sewage systems for most. Waste was dumped into pits or streams. Chamber pots were emptied into the street or into the soil behind Eufuru, home. Diseases spread easily. Fleas and lice were common. It was a world of effort without guarantee. And so, people did what they could, when they could. Some days they bathed. Some days they wiped. Some days they simply changed into a clean shift and hoped for the best. And always they hoped for better days. The fabric of medieval life was woven with these threads of effort. A little soap here, a rinse of vinegar there. A comb passed through hair while seated by firelight. Water warmed in a copper pot, poured carefully into a wooden basin. Hands rubbed together, then dried on a shared cloth. Clothes beaten clean in the river, then spread over bushes to dry in the sun. Children giggling as water was splashed on them from a bucket. Elders sighing as they soaked their feet before bed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It was human. And in that slow, deliberate world, where light faded with the sun and sound faded with distance, people found their ways of tending to the body. Not with speed, but with ritual. Not for vanity, but for peace. Not always enough to prevent illness, but often enough to soothe the spirit. The Middle Ages were not as grimy as they are often imagined. They were earthy, certainly, tangled, full of smells and stains and the press of closeness, but also full of small quiet gestures, of rinsing, rubbing, scrubbing, soothing, of tending to the human body with the tools the earth could offer: wood, water, ash, oil, herb, cloth. And so tonight, as you lie in your bed, you might imagine your own nightly rituals echoing theirs. A basin of water, a soft towel, the brush of fingers through hair, the hush of the room as the day slips quietly away. The night continues to deepen now. The fire burns low. Outside, the stars shine in silence. And inside, you rest, clean in spirit if not in skin, peaceful in the knowledge that even long ago people sought the same comfort you do now: a clean body, a soft bed, and a night free of worry. The night has now thickened into stillness. You can almost hear the hush, so deep, so settled, it wraps itself around every corner of your room. The fire is only aglow now, not even flickering, just resting, like breath slowed to the edge of sleep. Outside, the earth is blanketed by shadow and moonlight. The world is quiet, and you are safe here, warm and unhurried. Let yourself sink even deeper into stillness as we return to the slow rhythm of another forgotten chapter from the everyday lives of medieval people. Those who cleaned not for beauty, but for dignity, comfort, and care. We have already walked through village homes and monasteries, into bathhouses and before hearths. We've seen water warmed with care, soaps made by hand, children's hair rinsed with herbs, and feet soaked before bed. Now, our story drifts further, not to a new topic, but deeper into the fabric of medieval life, where cleanliness wove itself into the social fabric, where washing was not merely personal, but cultural, symbolic, even political. To understand this, let us wander slowly into the world of medieval cities. Unlike the open spaces of villages and the measured calm of monasteries, cities were bustling, noisy, often dirty. The streets were narrow, winding, and crowded with carts, livestock, merchants, and people. The smell of humanity, bakers' ovens, fishmongers' scraps, tanners' vats, chamber pots emptied from windows, hung in the air. But even in these close quarters, people found ways to keep themselves and each other clean, or clean enough to get by. In many towns, guilds oversaw trades. Soap makers, laundresses, barbers, even bathhouse attendants all had their place in this tapestry. They offered services not only to nobles or clergy, but also to merchants, craftsmen, and sometimes even the poor. Their work was humble, yet essential. A good barber was trusted to shave, lance a boil, and scrub your scalp. A skilled laundress knew which herbs kept linens white, which clays drew out grease. And in their daily labours, these workers carried the burden of cleanliness for others. Imagine now, walking down a cobbled street in 14th century Bruges. The sun is low. A woman leans out of her window and dumps grey water into the street below. A child calls to a dog. A shopkeeper sweeps his threshold. And near a corner, you see a sign. A wooden board painted with a steaming tub. A bathhouse. The bathhouses of the Middle Ages were varied, but many were surprisingly elaborate. In some regions, especially the Holy Roman Empire and parts of Italy and France, they offered tubs, hot and cold pools, steam rooms, and spaces for massage or meals. You might book a private room, or bathe communally, separated by gender or by time. Men and women bathed in shifts or on alternating days. In some cities, mixed bathing existed, at times controversial, at times simply accepted. Within these walls, the noise of the street faded, a kind of sanctuary emerged. You disrobed, perhaps with the help of an attendant. Your clothes were hung carefully, sometimes fumigated with herbs to ward off lice or fleas. You stepped into the warmth of the tub, wooden, lined with cloth, or wax filled with water, heated over iron stoves. It steamed gently around your skin. A servant might pour water over your back. Another might offer wine or spiced broth. Cleanliness here was layered. Physical comfort, yes, but also connection. Gossip was shared. Business was discussed. Songs were sung. For the poor, such moments were rare but cherished. For the rich, they were expected. To be clean was not just to be cared for. It was a mark of refinement, of order, of status. But bathhouses came under scrutiny too. As plague swept through Europe in waves, fears grew about public spaces. Warm, damp air was seen as a risk. Some physicians warned that bathing opened the pores to disease. Others argued that not bathing caused decay and imbalance. And so the practices changed. Bathtubs were used less, and dry methods took their place. Linens were changed more often. Herbs were burned in homes. Baths became rarer, more private. The adult church too had shifting views. At times it encouraged cleanliness, especially among clergy. At other times it warned against the temptation of vanity or the sin of lust, especially in bathhouses where nudity was common. And so, like the tide, public washing practices rose and fell with fashion, with fear, and with faith. Back in the home, even among the working poor, washing remained part of life, especially for special occasions. Weddings, feast days, the arrival of a guest. These moments triggered a flurry of activity. Clothes were beaten clean, water was boiled, faces were scrubbed pink, beards were trimmed, hands were soaked in wine or vinegar to remove the grime of daily work. Shoes were polished with fat or soot. A new shift might be worn, and herbs tucked into belts or collars. Everyone, no matter their rank, knew the importance of presenting oneself cleanly before the community. It was a kind of ritual, not simply about soap and water, but about dignity, readiness, respect. The act of cleaning was an act of joining. It said, I belong here. I am part of this moment. And even in death, cleanliness mattered. The dead were washed always, a sacred task, often performed by women. Warm water, clean cloths, quiet prayers. The body was laid out, sometimes scented with myrrh or lavender, wrapped in linen, kissed farewell. To die clean was to pass into the next life with grace. To wash the dead was to honor their journey. The tools of this world were few, but carefully kept. A wooden basin, a strip of linen, carefully folded, a bar of soap stored in waxed cloth, a comb carved from horn, a vial of rosewater or vinegar, a twig, brush, a stone for heating. These simple items, worn by use and age, sat beside the hearth or on a windowsill, always within reach, always part of the daily rhythm. There was no vanity drawer, no shelf of bottles, just what was needed, and nothing more. In some regions, cleanliness also took on community meaning. In Scandinavia, the tradition of the sauna endured from earlier centuries. Long, low huts built from logs, heated with stones, used by families and even whole villages. People sat together in the warmth, sweat dripping from their skin, and afterward plunged into icy lakes or rolled in snow. This was not just washing, it was health, it was renewal. In southern Spain, under Islamic rule, public bathhouses called hammams thrived. Inspired by Roman and Arabic customs, they were architectural wonders. Arched doorways, domed ceilings, mosaics. There were rooms of increasing heat, fountains for cooling, benches for reclining. Bathing was tied to purification before prayer, but also to community, to tradition, to peace. And everywhere, regardless of geography or belief, water remained the central thread. Whether feared or revered, water offered something nothing else could. The power to soften, to soothe, to carry away the weight of dust and toil. You can imagine now the soft sounds of a bath in progress. A scoop of water, ladled gently. The sigh of someone easing into a warm tub. The patter of droplets on stone, the soft drag of cloth across skin. The world slows in these moments. The mind rests. The body releases. And perhaps, after washing, there is stillness. A fresh tunic pulled over clean skin. Hair left damp to dry in the fire's warmth. A candle lit. Bread broken. Hands folded in. Quiet. The body, now clean, gives way to rest. Tonight, as your thoughts drift like leaves on a slow-moving stream, you are closer than ever to these distant lives. You have your own rituals, your own ways of washing off the day, of preparing for rest. Perhaps they involve warm water and soft towels, or a favorite scent. Perhaps they are simpler still. A glass of water by the bed, a moment of stillness, the feel of clean sheets. The world may have changed, but the need has not. The desire to feel clean, to be at ease in one's own skin, to meet the night not with noise but with peace. It is old and deep and beautifully human. The hush of the world has deepened now, quiet and weightless like breath held in the dark. You are tucked into the folds of rest, still and warm, as the soft murmur of history continues around you. There's no rush, no edge, no urgency, only time unwinding slowly, like smoke curling through rafters or water running through cupped hands. Let the story carry you gently through this next passage of medieval life. We remain in the same world, following the same thread, the slow, quiet art of keeping clean, in a time long before plumbing, before polish, before the gleaming white of modern bathrooms. Tonight, we find ourselves in the quiet hours of a medieval household, not in the city, not in a grand manor, but in the middle land of modest comfort. Perhaps it's a small cottage on the edge of a village, where the rhythms of cleanliness abound more to routine than ritual, shaped by the seasons and the simplicity of daily life. You wake before the sun, as many did, your bed no more than a frame of wood and a sack of straw, layered with woolen blankets and tucked close to the fire's remains. The air is crisp, even inside. Your breath shows in soft puffs. A small jug of water left by the hearth overnight is no longer warm, but not yet frozen. You dip your hands in, just a touch. It's enough. The sensation of cold water on your face clears the remnants of sleep. You dry with a strip of linen, worn soft by many washings. You sit quietly for a moment, pulling your tunic over your head, the linen cool against your freshly wiped skin. You've done this countless mornings, just as your parents did, and theirs before them. A face washed in the morning, hands cleaned before meals, feet soaked before bed. These were not formalities, but comforts, quiet anchors in a world full of labour and change. The cleaning cloths used are simple, strips of flax-woven fabric perhaps, hemmed at the edges by careful hands, washed regularly and hung on the line to dry. When a cloth becomes too worn, it is not thrown away. It becomes something else, a rag for scrubbing, a bandage, a cloth for polishing pewter or wiping shoes. Nothing is wasted. Everything finds its second life. A small wooden comb sits on the windowsill, its teeth uneven with use. Combing is done each morning, sometimes dry, sometimes after rubbing the scalp with vinegar or rosemary oil. The combing is not just about neatness. It's a defense against lice and dirt, a comfort, a part of waking. Children cry out if the knots are bad. Mothers shush and soothe. The rhythm of the comb, the tug and release, becomes part of the day. And in the yard, washing days come in cycles. Not every day, not even every week, but often enough to matter. When the skies are clear and the wind is light, tubs are brought out. Water is drawn or collected, then heated in kettles. Ash soap is made in advance. Animal fat boiled with lye, perhaps mixed with dried mint or marigold. The soap is coarse but effective. Linen shirts and underclothes are scrubbed on boards or with stones, then rinsed in fresh water and wrung out by hand. They are hung on hedges or stretched over ropes, white fabric fluttering in the breeze like small flags of diligence and care. It is back-breaking work, this laundering, kneeling, scrubbing, lifting, carrying. The hands of washerwomen are often cracked and reddened, their fingernails raw. But when the work is done, there is a satisfaction, a scent in the air of soap and sunshine, a sense of order restored. Inside, the home is swept each morning. A broom of bundled twigs moves dust and ash into the hearth or out the door. The floor, whether packed earth or stone, is refreshed with rushes, cleaned and dried reeds or grasses scattered underfoot. Sometimes herbs are mixed in, thyme, mint, sweet flag. When crushed underfoot, these leave behind a faint grassy scent that rises with each step. The floor, though primitive, becomes not just cleaner, but kinder. This attention to the home was mirrored in how people treated guests. When someone arrived at your door, it was customary to offer them water to wash their hands. A basin and towel were brought forth, perhaps with a pinch of salt or a sprig of sage. The guest, in turn, offered thanks. This ritual existed across classes, across regions. Even in the humblest homes, a guest might wash before sharing bread. Clean hands were a sign of civility. Cleanliness in this context was not about vanity, it was about community. In noble households, this ritual took on grandeur. A silver, ewer and basin, a servant to pour, another to dry, aromatic water, perhaps with rose petals or lemon balm. Even here, the purpose was not display alone. It was care, hospitality, grace. To be clean before a meal was to respect the food, the host, the gathering. The utensils were often shared. Hands were the primary tool for eating. Thus, washing hands before and after meals was essential. Napkins were not common for most. Instead, people wiped hands on bread, cloth, or even on their own garments. Still, there was a strong expectation of basic cleanliness before one touched the communal dish or broke the bread. And what of those who could not clean themselves? The elderly, the sick, the wounded, these people were not forgotten. Within the home, they were tended to with warm cloths, oils, and baths prepared in wooden tubs. In monasteries, the infirmary was where monks or nuns gently washed the bodies of those too weak to do so themselves. Cleanliness here was not about social standing. It was compassion in action, a way to relieve suffering, to offer dignity. Even the lepers, pushed to the edge of society, often lived in communities where rituals of washing were preserved. Leper houses, known as lazar houses, were established in many medieval towns. There, those suffering were often attended to by religious caretakers who provided water, herbs, and care, not to cure, but to comfort. Clean bandages, rinsed wounds, a warm basin to soothe pain. These acts, though quiet and often unseen, formed the backbone of medieval mercy. Across the land, in every region, different waters were believed to have healing powers. Springs and wells were marked as holy. Some flowed through limestone, their waters rich with minerals. Pilgrims travelled long distances to bathe in them, or to fill jugs with sacred water to carry home. In places like Bath in England, thermal springs attracted those seeking healing. The warmth soothed joints. The minerals treated skin ailments. And the very act of bathing was believed to be an invitation to divine grace. Washing then became more than just physical. It was emotional. It was spiritual. It was a return to balance, to stillness, to self. And so, as evening returns in this world long past, the routines settle in again. A woman sits by the hearth, dipping a cloth in warm water and wiping her arms and face. A man cleans the soles of his feet with vinegar, then rubs them dry before pulling on woolen socks. A child leans against a mother's side as her hair is combed with careful fingers. The day has left its marks, dirt beneath the nails, smoke in the hair, tiredness in the bones. But slowly, with each gentle motion, the day is let go. Outside, the stars blink into view. The moon, pale and round, climbs slowly above rooftops and trees. Somewhere, a wooden tub is drained. Water sloshes onto packed dirt. A towel is wrung out. A window is shuttered. Sleep begins to rise like a slow tide. You may notice now that all of this, the rituals, the tools, the scents and gestures, are not so far from your own. We have more luxuries today. Heated water with a twist of a tap. Dozens of soaps and creams and oils. Lights that never flicker. Floors that never need rushes. But the feeling is the same. To wash away the day. to prepare the body for rest. 2. Treat oneself with quiet kindness. So breathe gently now. Let the images of wooden basins and flickering candlelight dissolve into the dark. Let the softness of linen and the scent of lavender guide you toward dreams. The people of the Middle Ages knew, as we do, that sleep comes best to a body cared for, a mind at ease, and a heart gently tended. The hush is complete now. Even the wind seems to pause outside, brushing only gently against the eaves of your room. The world has gone quiet and still, and so have you. In this dark, meditative space where time has slowed to a quiet breath, we continue our slow walk through the everyday lives of people long gone, who, like you, sought peace at the end of the day, and found it in the small steady rituals of care. Let yourself drift gently as we return to the story, not to begin something new, but to remain, to linger in the soft edges of the same world. A world without running water, without electric light, without plastic bottles or fluffy towels. A world where cleanliness was a form of patience, a kind of slow, human choreography passed down through generations, always done by hand, by heart, by instinct. Tonight, our journey stays indoors, within, the home, beneath thatch or tile, where the act of keeping clean extended not only to the body, but to all things touched by the body. Linens, tools, beds, combs, cloths, everything the skin met required tending. And so, the labour of cleanliness never quite ended, but it never rushed either. It unfolded in the same rhythm as the seasons, the same rhythm as sleep. Let us imagine now the bed, not a mattress as you know it, but a frame, wooden sturdy, perhaps carved with simple flourishes, or plain and purely functional. It holds a bag of straw or hay, sometimes filled with feathers if the family is wealthy, or perhaps wool if sheep are part of their life. The bedclothes are linen, though not always white. Many are creamy, oat-coloured or gently browned by lye washing over years. Once a week, or when guests are expected, the linens are changed. This is no small task. The sheets are unpinned or unknotted from the frame and shaken outside. The straw mattress might be aired or beaten with sticks to remove dust and mites. If the weather is warm and dry, the entire bedding is hung in the sun, where heat and light do their slow, invisible work. Sunlight, even then, was known to cleanse. Back. Inside, clean sheets are smoothed onto the straw tick. A lavender sachet or sprig of sweet woodruff may be tucked between the folds. In colder seasons, a woolen blanket is added. For the very wealthy, furs. For most, just extra layers of woven wool. Before bed, the body is made ready. You step toward the hearth, where a basin of water has been warming through the evening. It's not for a full bath, those are still rare, but for the quiet nightly rinse. You dip a cloth and wash your face first, then your hands, then your feet, if time and warmth allow. Each step is slow. You don't scrub. You press, wipe, soothe. The cloth is rinsed, wrung out, then hung near the fire to dry overnight. You rub your hands dry on a square of linen, worn soft with use. A comb, carved from bone or horn, is pulled through your hair, not quickly, but carefully, not just to tidy, but to comfort. You sit while someone does it for you. a spouse, a sibling, a child. In some homes, hair is braided loosely before bed to keep it from tangling. Sleep, it was believed, should not come to a body in disorder, and so these small gestures, the warm water, the slow combing, the smoothing of cloth, are all part of preparing for rest. The mind quiets as the body is tended. The day is set down. Even the clothes removed at night are cared for. A tunic is hung from a peg or draped over a stool near the fire to keep it from dampening overnight. Undershirts may be turned inside out to air. Stockings are checked for wear or dampness. A belt or pouch is emptied and stored. Shoes are placed neatly by the door, sometimes stuffed with straw to help them hold their shape. The care of belongings was considered part of cleanliness. Dirty clothes and cluttered tools were not just unsightly, they were seen as signs of laziness, even sin. In monastic life especially, orderliness was next to godliness. Each item in its place, each day with its rhythm. Even washing had an order. In the Benedictine rule, time for cleaning was carved into the weekly routine. Monks washed on Saturdays, laundered their robes at appointed times, and shaved according to the liturgical calendar. But this structure wasn't just for monks. Many households, even poor ones, developed their own rhythms. Monday might be washing day, Tuesday for mending, Wednesday for scrubbing floors or drying herbs. The home was not always pristine. How could it be with dirt floors, open hearths and soot from oil lamps? But effort was constant. Water was fetched, firewood gathered, ash swept, clothes rinsed, beds aired. Each of these tasks whispered, "I care." And just as the home was cleaned, so were the objects of faith. In a corner, perhaps near a shuttered window, sits a small shrine, a wooden cross, a painted icon, a candle stub. These sacred things are dusted gently, reverently. The cloth used is set aside for no other purpose. During feast days, the altar is adorned with fresh herbs, newly pressed linen, or beeswax candles, if they can be afforded. Cleanliness, in this sense, was not only personal, it was a way to show respect to something beyond oneself. The tools of cleanliness also required tending. The bucket for drawing water from the well had to be kept free from rot. The soap, wrapped in cloth, was stored in a dry cupboard to prevent softening. Linen cloths were boiled occasionally to kill lice and soften the weave. The wooden comb was scrubbed with vinegar or ash. Even the broom, made of birch or heather, had its bristles trimmed when they grew wild. All of this was done not in one day, but across many, slowly, quietly, with hands that were always working, always watching. Even children were taught the ways of washing, not all at once, but piece by piece. How to dip a cloth just enough to wet it. How to wring it without wasting water. How to scrub a wooden spoon without splintering it. How to bathe a baby with one arm steadying and the other rinsing. These lessons were not written down. They were shown, repeated, absorbed. And in all of this, there was a rhythm. Not efficient, not perfect, but lasting. A rhythm you might feel even now, as your own night deepens. Perhaps you too have rituals. A last cup of tea. A book read in soft light. The brushing of teeth. The folding of clothes. The turning down of covers. The final sigh before sleep takes hold. Across centuries and cultures, these gestures are familiar. They remind us that beneath the differences of tools, of language, of belief, humans have always longed for the same quiet promise, that after the long day, the body can rest, that the world, no matter how harsh, can be softened, that peace can be prepared for, with water and cloth and care. And so, as you close your eyes and drift deeper into stillness, know that the story continues. Somewhere, far back in time, a woman stirs a basin of water. A man hangs a cloth by the fire. A child yawns as her hair is gently braided. The night surrounds them as it surrounds you now, quiet, unbroken, kind. Outside, the world is quiet enough now that you can hear the small things, the creak of old wood settling, the sigh of your breath as it leaves and returns. In this gentle stillness, time seems to melt away. There is no rush here, no urgency, only the slow, steady rhythm of sleep approaching, and the quiet continuation of our walk through the shadowed, flickering world of medieval cleanliness. We remain in that same soft, candlelit place, the same woven habits, the same daily rituals that drew the line between the waking world and the world of dreams. And tonight, our attention shifts to one of the quietest, least spoken parts of life, but one that reveals so much. The act of relieving oneself, the chamber pot, the latrine, the small necessary routines of tending to the body's needs when no one was watching. In the Middle Ages, there were no gleaming bathrooms, no tiled floors, no porcelain basins or plumbing. And yet every body needed tending, every day, every night. And so people developed systems, quiet ones, humble ones, to keep these needs managed and their surroundings as clean as they could. For most, the solution was simple: the chamber pot. In a village home, it might be nothing more than a clay or metal bowl, tucked beneath the bed or behind a curtain. At night, when the air was cold and the fire burned low, one did not step outside into the mud or snow. Instead, they would shift under the blankets, reach for the pot, and relieve themselves in silence. In the morning, the pot was emptied. Often, the contents were poured into a midden heap, a compost pile behind the house, or if the home was near a stream, into the water itself. Some homes had shallow pits dug in the backyard, lined with straw, where waste could be buried. It wasn't pleasant, but it was ordinary, unremarkable, just part of the daily rhythm of life. In towns and cities, the challenge grew: more people, less space. And so public latrines were built, especially near markets or gathering places. They were simple buildings, sometimes overhanging rivers, sometimes built above cesspits. Wood planks with holes, curtains or walls for privacy. Not everyone used them, of course. Some preferred the privacy of their own homes. Others had no choice. In wealthier households, garderobes were built. A garderobe was a kind of medieval toilet, a small room set high in a stone wall, with a seat built over a vertical shaft. Waste dropped down into a pit below, or into the moat, that often surrounded castles or manor houses. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. These small rooms were often tucked away in the thick stone walls, just wide enough for one person. The seat might be carved from wood, sometimes with a lid. A small window allowed light and sometimes air, though the smell was often persistent. People dealt with it in their own ways. Scented herbs were hung nearby. Lavender, rosemary, mint, sprigs of sage or sweet flag were pressed into cracks in the stone. In especially wealthy homes, bundles of dried flowers were kept in small bowls to gently mask the odour. In some abbeys, censers of incense were burned near latrines during communal use. What about wiping? To modern ears, it's a curious question, but the answer, as always, depends on place and time. In some areas, cloth rags were used, washed and reused like everything else. In others, moss or straw was common. In towns, people sometimes used scraps of old linen or wool. In monasteries, a water jug and cloth were shared, and cleanliness was encouraged not just for health, but for spiritual discipline. In the Islamic world, already advanced in medical hygiene, water was emphasized for cleansing. Where possible, this practice influenced southern Europe, particularly in Spain, where contact with Muslim culture introduced more refined practices of washing after relieving oneself. Still, for most in medieval Europe, the approach was practical, local, and often improvisational. Whatever could be found was used. Children were taught these habits early. A mother might show a child how to squat behind the barn or use a small pot by the hearth. There was no shame in it, just necessity. What mattered most was how one cleaned afterward, and whether it was done with care. And afterward, the hands. Always the hands. Whether with water, vinegar, sand, or simple wiping cloths, people made some effort, however small, to cleanse the hands. In towns, you might find basins outside homes or workshops, where people rinsed before meals or after certain tasks. In monasteries, hand-washing was a sacred act, done in silence with intention. It was understood that the hands, more than anything else, moved between the clean and the unclean. And so, to tend the hands was to protect the household, the meal, the body itself. And yet, for all this effort, disease still came. The limitations of medieval sanitation were many. Waste contaminated water. Cesspits overflowed. Rats and fleas carried illness. And yet, even in the face of these challenges, people did not abandon cleanliness. When the Black Death struck, it was believed that foul smells carried the sickness. People burned herbs. They avoided latrines when they could. They perfumed their gloves and kerchiefs. They washed with vinegar. These efforts were not always effective, but they were sincere. In times of fear, the urge to cleanse became stronger. Not just of the body, but of the soul. Confession, fasting, pilgrimage, alms. These were spiritual baths in a sense, ways of washing away the unseen dirt, the kind that clung deeper than the skin. And even the physical act of cleansing took on new meaning. Washing, feet before prayer, scrubbing the hands before touching the holy book, bathing the sick with gentle hands and soft cloths. It reminds us that cleanliness was not only about health or smell, it was, in its most tender form, about respect. Respect for the self, respect for others. To clean the chamber pot was not glamorous, but it was necessary. To rinse a cloth, to burn herbs, to keep a broom near the door, these were small, enduring acts of love. Love for one's home, for one's family, for the community of neighbours who shared the same air, the same earth, the same fragile bodies. And as night deepens around you now, it's worth pausing to notice the gentle human beauty in that, Hygiene. 2. Relieve the body. To rinse the hands, to pour away the waste, to light a small sprig of rosemary near the door. These are not dramatic acts. They are quiet. They are humble. But they carry a kind of care that threads through the centuries and finds us still. You may have your own version now. A bathroom with tiled walls, soap that smells of lavender or lemon, water at the turn of a handle, a fresh towel, a flicked light switch. But beneath all of that, the purpose remains the same: to care for yourself, to clean not just for appearance, but for peace. And so, as your thoughts soften and your breath grows slower, you rest with the knowledge that even in the simplest parts of life there is softness. Even in the quietest routines there is connection. Even in the most private of needs there is dignity. The air is hushed now, wrapped in the deep folds of night. You are still, your limbs heavy with rest, your mind quiet, drifting slowly on the gentle current of a story that does not rush you forward, but simply holds you here, calm and weightless, just as you are. We remain in the same world, in the same rhythm, in the same unhurried unfolding of medieval life, still walking softly in the footsteps of those who lived long before us, still exploring how they kept themselves clean, not just in body, but in spirit, in habit, in home. Tonight, the focus gently shifts again, not to a new place, but to another layer of the same old world, the healing arts and the role of cleanliness in medicine. In the Middle Ages, sickness was never far. The causes were not fully understood, not as we understand them now, but people observed the signs. They knew what decay smelled like. They knew what wounds looked like when they turned bad. They knew which air felt wrong to breathe and which fevers didn't break. In this space between knowledge and mystery, cleanliness became both a remedy and a prayer, a comfort, a hope. Let yourself walk slowly now into the home of a healer. She is a woman of quiet movements and calm eyes, not a physician. Those were rare and mostly found in the cities, but a wise woman, trusted by her village. She keeps bundles of dried herbs in the rafters. She knows how to draw out a splinter without tearing the skin. She understands which leaves soothe burns and which roots calm a sick stomach. When someone arrives with fever, the first thing she does is wash them. A cloth, dipped in water steeped with rosemary and marigold, wiped gently over the brow, the neck, the wrists, not to cure, but to comfort. Clean linen is laid beneath the patient. The sweat is not ignored. It is part of the healing, but it is managed, changed, so that the body may rest. Wounds are cleaned with wine or vinegar or salt water. The sting is real, but it means the healer is trying. Bandages are strips of boiled linen, tied gently with hands that have done this many times. They are washed and reused when they can be. When they can't, they are burned or buried for fear of spreading illness. Cleanliness in this world is not sterile, it is intimate. A man tends his wife's fever with a damp cloth and a whispered prayer. A sister rinses a child's blistered feet with chamomile tea. A monk wipes the lips of a dying stranger with a corner of his robe. These moments are full of tenderness, of presence, of the kind of care that asks nothing in return. Hospitals did exist, though they were not what we think of today. They were often attached to monasteries, places where the sick were not only treated but sheltered, where food, rest, and spiritual attention were part of the healing process. Clean bedding was prized, floors were swept, walls were lime-washed to brighten the room and discourage pests. Patients were bathed when they arrived, sometimes fully, sometimes just their hands and face. They were offered fresh shifts and herbs to breathe in, to drive away foul humours. Physicians wrote about cleanliness too. Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess and healer, advised washing the hands and face regularly. She wrote of bathing with herbs to restore balance, of keeping wounds clean, of observing the colour and smell of bodily fluids as signs of health or illness. Other medieval medical texts echoed the same theme, that filth in the body mirrored disorder in the soul, that purity in any form encouraged healing. And so, washing was part of healing. Baths were prescribed for melancholy, steam for congested lungs, compresses for pain. Even the act of combing one's hair was seen as restorative. The scalp was massaged. The skin kept supple with oils or animal fat mixed with crushed herbs. The body was not an inconvenience. It was something to be honoured, tended, listened to. The tools of healing were also kept clean. A knife for lancing, a thin blade wrapped in leather, was rinsed after every use, sometimes with wine, sometimes passed through fire. Bowls used for poultices were scrubbed with sand and dried in the sun. Mortars and pestles were washed thoroughly between preparations. Mistakes were costly, and so the careful, repetitive cleaning was part of the rhythm, part of the skill. Even in childbirth, which was among the most dangerous passages of medieval life, cleanliness was woven into the care. Midwives washed their hands with vinegar or strong-smelling herbs before attending to the mother. Clean sheets were laid down, though often reused. A birthing chair might be wiped with cloth soaked in hot water. After birth, the baby was rinsed gently, wrapped in linen, and pressed close to the mother's chest. The umbilical cord was tied with boiled thread and cut with a clean blade, sometimes one that had been passed through flame. Was it perfect? No, but it was deliberate. It was loving. It was based on centuries of observation, of what helped and what harmed. Even in times of plague, when fear was greater than understanding, cleanliness remained a thread of resistance. Homes were swept, fireplaces were kept lit, clothes were boiled if possible, visitors were avoided, bells were rung as warnings. And yet, if someone did fall ill, neighbours came. A basin of broth, a cloth for the forehead, a whispered prayer. These too were forms of cleansing, quiet ways of saying, "I am here. You are not alone." The rituals after death were also full of careful cleaning. The body was washed slowly, hair combed, hands folded, eyes closed, linen wrapped around the limbs. In wealthier homes, scented oils might be rubbed into the skin. Poorer ones, herbs were scattered in the shroud. The washer of the dead, a role often given to older women, performed her task with reverence. It was not about sanitation, it was about honour. To die clean was to be sent onward with dignity. To wash the dead was to say, your body mattered, still matters, still deserves care. And now, as you lie there, your own body still, your breath soft, you might feel a strange comfort in knowing this truth, that even centuries ago, when the world was colder, darker, and far less forgiving, people still cared for one another in gentle ways. They cleaned because they loved. They washed because they hoped. Maybe you have your own version of this now. A hot bath after a long day. A fresh sheet pulled tight. A clean cup of water by the bed. These are not luxuries. They are kindnesses. And kindness, in any century, is what gives life its softness. So as the hours slip deeper into night, and your thoughts become lighter than air, let yourself be held by this quiet lineage. You are not so far removed from them. Those villagers and monks, those mothers and healers, you too tend your body. You too make peace with the day by wiping it gently away. The silence tonight is softer than ever, thicker somehow, as though the night has wrapped itself around you like wool. The fire has long gone to embers. The room is still, save for the sound of your breath, steady and slow. You are warm, safe, at rest. And still our story continues, unfolding like a clean linen sheet, smooth and unrushed. We remain in the same rhythm, still nestled within the quiet domestic rituals of the Middle Ages. And now, with the night deepened, we linger around one of the most overlooked yet most enduring forms of medieval cleanliness. The laundering of clothes, not the ceremonial kind, not the festival whites worn for feast days or weddings. No, tonight we follow the rhythms of everyday washing. The sleeves stained with sweat, the hem caked in mud, the underclothes worn against the skin. These too were cared for, not discarded, not forgotten. And their care was a task that shaped entire days. Let yourself drift to a small clearing beside a stream. The light is gentle here, mottled by leaves. The sun is low, but still warm. The air carries the soft splash of water, the kishy hum of insects, and the distant laughter of women gathering at the edge of the riverbank. They are washerwomen, some hired, some working for their own families. They carry with them wooden paddles, woven baskets, coarse soap wrapped in cloth, and linen cloths of every size and shade. This is a place of work, but also of familiarity, of conversation, of shared rhythm. They kneel in the shallows, their skirts hitched up. One woman beats a sheet against a flat stone, lifting and slapping with practiced grace. Another kneads a shirt between her fists, lathering it with soap made of ash and tallow, sometimes softened with herbs, marjoram, lemon balm, chamomile, if it could be spared. The scent rises gently into the air, mingling with the smell of water and earth. Laundry days are not every day. They come with the weather, when the skies are clear and the wind promising. In winter, clothes are scrubbed indoors beside the hearth, with water heated over flame and steam curling toward the rafters. But in warmer seasons, the river is the gathering place, a social place, a sacred place even, in its own quiet way. You hear the sounds, cloth snapping wet in the air, water rushing over rocks, murmured stories passed between women. A child watches from the bank, playing with a stick. A dog noses at the baskets, hopeful. The world feels paused here, held in the slow, steady work of cleansing. When the clothes are scrubbed, They are rinsed downstream, swirled and lifted, then wrung by hand with practiced efficiency. Fingers twist the fabric into tight ropes, releasing the weight of water. Arms strain gently with the task, but it is a movement the body knows well. Tiring, yes, but rhythmic, reassuring. Back at the cottage or farmhouse, lines are strung between trees or beams. If no line exists, the garments are draped over hedges, fences, or smooth stones. And there they hang and flutter in the breeze, white linen catching sunlight, woolen hose heavy and slow to dry, undershirts shaped by use, aprons, children's shifts, sleeping cloths, all swaying like silent flags of a life tended with care. The act of hanging laundry is done with intention. One must watch the sky, mind the wind, shake the fabric clean of leaves or bugs, pull the edges flat to keep them from stiffening. Some sprinkle lavender water on garments before they dry. Others pin sprigs of thyme to the hems, a small protection against insects. These are quiet acts, unnoticed perhaps by others, but they matter. And when the laundry is dry, it is folded, sometimes pressed beneath stones or smoothed with warm irons. Not the kind of irons you might imagine, but simple metal tools heated in. The fire then passed over fabric with thick cloth between to protect the weave. The smell of hot linen fills the air. The garments are stacked in baskets, wrapped in clean cloths, and placed in chests lined with dried herbs or wood shavings to keep away moths. There is something deeply grounding in these rituals. To scrub, to rinse, to hang, to fold, each step is a return to order, to balance, not perfection, but care, attention, a way of saying this too deserves to be clean. This shirt, this apron, this shift I wear close to my body, it deserves a second chance, a new morning, a day without the dust of yesterday. And in larger homes, these tasks become a quiet orchestra of movement. Servants rise early to draw water, to heat copper tubs, to scrub and wring and hang dozens of garments. The laundry room, if it exists, is warm and fragrant, filled with steam and the scent of soaproot or elderflowers. Trestle tables hold folded garments. A long pole across the ceiling supports drying cloths. A fire keeps the room alive, with heat, and all day long, water is fetched and poured and changed again. Even nobles, with all their finery, depend on these unseen hands. Their linen is thin and easily torn. Their ruffs and collars require starching, pressing, shaping. Their gowns are brushed daily, their gloves wiped with cloths soaked in vinegar. Their shoes are polished, their undergarments laundered discreetly. Cleanliness, for them, is part of presentation, yes, but also comfort. A woolen robe too long unwashed itches the skin. A collar too stiff causes rash. Even they, in their silks and satins, rely on soap and water in the end. For the poor, clothes are few, but still cared for. A man may own only 2 shirts, one for work, one for feast days. A woman may have a single dress and an apron, but what they own, they tend. They patch, re-dye, turn inside out to air. Holes are stitched with care. Fabric is shared between siblings, then between generations. A baby's wrap becomes a headscarf, then a rag, then a patch on a tunic. Every thread tells a story of effort and resourcefulness. And when clothes grow too worn to be worn, they are boiled into pulp to become paper. or burned for warmth, or torn into strips for bandages. Nothing is wasted. Even at the end of usefulness, there is purpose. Let yourself imagine the slow folding of clean clothes at dusk, a mother smoothing her child's shift, laying it across a wooden stool, a man lifting a newly dried tunic, holding it to the fire's light, a woman braiding her hair with clean ribbons, the smell of soap still clinging faintly to the fabric, the comfort of knowing that, even in a hard and muddy world, some things can be made fresh again. Perhaps you have your own version, a laundry day with the windows open, sheets catching the breeze, the weight of warm clothes in your arms, the sound of buttons clicking in the dryer. Even now, these acts calm us. They return us to center. They remind us that care begins with small, steady gestures, that we do not need to rush in order to matter. So tonight, as you lie beneath your own clean sheets, take comfort in this. You are not alone in these routines. Across centuries and continents, people have boiled water, rubbed cloth against stone, hung shirts in the sun, folded socks in silence. Not because anyone asked them to, but because they understood, deep in their bones, that cleanliness, however simple, is a kind of love. The night has deepened into stillness now, so quiet you can almost hear the dust settling. The kind of stillness that blankets the world when everything necessary has been done, and there is nothing left but to rest. You are lying peacefully, perhaps sensing the soft whisper of cloth against skin, the memory of warm water, the clean hush of a home prepared for sleep. Our journey through medieval cleanliness continues, slow and gentle as ever, still beside the hearth, still among wooden tubs and folded linen, still in the world where care is measured not in noise, but in repetition. Tonight, we remain exactly where we were, still within the boundaries of the medieval household, but now we let the focus soften even further, like candlelight dimming, and rest upon the rituals of cleanliness that prepared the body and soul for the Sabbath. For most of medieval Europe, Saturday or Sunday, depending on region and religious tradition, was not only a day of worship, but a day of preparation, of stillness, of quiet polish. The week's work may have been muddy, blistered long, but the day of rest was something else entirely. And to arrive at it, one prepared, cleaned, slowed. Let yourself imagine the day before the holy day. The house is tidied with extra care. Floors are swept not once, but twice. The rushes on the floor are changed if they can be. Ash from the hearth is removed and scattered into the garden. Copper pots are polished, wooden bowls scrubbed with coarse salt. The smell of herbs fills the air, not for show, but for comfort. Lavender in the corners, thyme tucked into chests, sweet flag laid beneath bedding. And then the body. A basin is brought near the fire, and filled not hurriedly, but with quiet attention. It may take many trips from the well. Water is poured from jug to kettle, heated and mixed with cool until the warmth is just right. Into it, someone may add dried flowers, perhaps calendula or elderflower, rosemary if it can be spared. The family takes turns washing, hands, faces, feet. Some strip to the waist and rinse arms and backs with ladles. Children giggle and splash. Elders move slowly, savouring the warmth. A cloth is dipped, wrung, passed gently across skin. The washing is not rough. It's deliberate. a kind of soft ceremony. Hair is combed out slowly, braided or tied with ribbons. Beards are trimmed. Nails are scrubbed gently with the edge of a knife or the coarse side of soap. Not for vanity, but for decency, for readiness. A way of saying tomorrow is not like other days. Clothes are laid out the night before. Not new clothes perhaps, but clean ones. A white shift, a well-mended tunic, a cloak without stains. If a family has only one nice outfit between them, it is passed from person to person across the weeks. Sometimes borrowed, sometimes stitched from scraps. Even in poverty, one made an effort. To arrive at church with clean hands, with hair combed, was a sign of respect. For the day, for the community, for God. Shoes are wiped down with cloth. A belt is polished. A token or cross is tucked into a pocket. Everything is readied, quietly, before sleep. And when Sunday comes, it begins with the sound of bells. Soft, distant, echoing across fields and villages. They call people to worship, yes, but also to community, to presence, to the ritual of shared stillness. Before leaving the house, people wash once more, just their hands perhaps, or their faces, with water from a pitcher left near the hearth. A final combing, a final pat to smooth the cloth. Doors are closed, gently behind them, and the house rests clean and quiet. In the church, the air is cold, but filled with warmth of another kind. The scent of beeswax candles, the worn feel of stone beneath feet, the hush of voices, and always the knowledge that everyone here, young or old, rich or poor, has prepared in their own way, with water, with cloth, with hands that rinsed and wiped and smoothed. Cleanliness on this day was not about impressing others. It was about reverence, about letting the body mirror the spirit, about quiet readiness. In Jewish communities across Europe, this preparation was even more ritualized. The Sabbath began at sunset Friday, and before it arrived all was cleaned. Floors swept, dishes washed, candles prepared, baths taken, clothes laid out, hair combed. It was a holy rhythm, followed with devotion. Even in hardship, these rituals continued, precisely because they brought peace, dignity, and continuity. And within monasteries, the preparation for Sunday began long before the bell rang. Monks rose before dawn, washed in silence, and changed into fresh robes, their fingernails trimmed, their hair tonsured and neat. Communal washing areas were carefully tended, their basins refilled, towels hung in rows. The air smelled faintly of soap root and linen. Everything was quiet, measured, still. Even the animals were brushed and fed, the tools cleaned and stowed, the garden beds checked for weeds. No labor was done on the Sabbath, but the preparation for rest was in itself a labor of devotion. And now, dear listener, let your mind wander back to your own rituals. Perhaps you've known that feeling, that soft sense of readiness on a clean Sunday morning, the smooth comfort of freshly washed clothes, the calm of a home where everything has been placed in order, the peace of walking slowly, knowing you need do nothing more today but be. Even now, the scent of soap, the feel of clean sheets, the warmth of a towel, these things still prepare us for rest, for worship, for reflection. The world has changed, of course, We have washing machines and scented candles, showers and dryers and soaps in a dozen fragrances, but the feeling underneath remains. The ancient need to make ready, to cleanse not just the dirt, but the heaviness, the noise, the clutter, to say, I have done what I can. I am prepared to rest. So now, as you lie still, wrapped in your own layers of softness, your mind can rest too. You've travelled through 1,000 years of quiet rituals, and the thread that ties them together is this: care. Care for the body, for the home, for the day ahead, and for the soul. Outside the stars are still. They hang above the world like old quiet watchers, unchanged by time, unconcerned with hurry. Their light is cool, ancient, gentle. It was under the same starlight that those we've spoken of, those medieval hands that washed, folded, tended, once moved about their days. And so tonight, in this peaceful pause before sleep, we follow the story further still, gliding gently now into one of the most overlooked yet deeply human spaces of medieval cleanliness, the washing of the dead. Let your breath soften. Let your body sink a little deeper into stillness. This is not a tale of fear or grief, but one of gentleness, of ritual, of the quiet, enduring dignity shown by the living to the ones they loved. Just as a child is washed upon entering the world, so too was the body carefully tended when it left it. The last bath, the final folding of cloth. When someone died in the Middle Ages, whether in a cottage, a castle, a cloister, or a field, the first thing the family did was close the eyes, gently, sometimes with a kiss, sometimes with fingers trembling, but always with care. The arms were crossed over the chest. A candle was lit. The windows were opened if there were windows. And then the washing began. It was not rushed. There was no reason to hurry. The task was done by those closest to the deceased, family members, neighbours, midwives, older women known for their calm hands. These were people familiar with the task, not professionals, not strangers. They came bearing soft cloths, basins of water, rosemary, sage, lavender, if it was in season. The body was washed from head to toe. Warm water was used if it could be prepared. A cloth, wrung out, was passed across the forehead, the cheeks, the chin. The limbs were gently wiped clean, one at a time. Dirt from under the nails was removed. Hair was combed slowly, tenderly, until it lay smooth. This was not about presentation. It was about closure, peace, a return to stillness. In Christian tradition, this washing was symbolic. It echoed baptism. It was a cleansing of the earthly life before stepping into the next. Even if the person had been bedridden, feverish or injured, the act of washing them made them whole again in the eyes of those who loved them. In this way, cleanliness was not just physical, it was spiritual. The linens used were washed afterward with care, or sometimes burned. The cloth that dried the body might be saved as a keepsake, or buried with the person. Soap made from lye and fat was used if needed. Herbs were tucked into the folds of the burial shroud, not for disguise, but as a kind of farewell. Scent, after all, carries memory. To wrap someone in rosemary was to say, you are remembered. For the poor, the body might be wrapped in simple linen, tied with twine or knotted cloth. For the more fortunate, a finely woven shroud was used, sometimes stitched with a cross or embroidered by hand. But the care of the body was universal. A peasant woman was washed with the same quiet reverence as a nobleman. In that moment, death made all equal, and it wasn't only adults. Infants too were washed before burial. A tiny body cradled one last time in clean cloth, hands rinsed in warm water, hair smoothed with fingertips. It was an act of sorrow, yes, but also of fierce love. A way of doing something, anything when nothing could be done. In monasteries, the death of a monk was marked by silence. After the final prayers were spoken, the body was taken to the washing room, a place as calm as a chapel. Brothers gathered, each with their task. One removed the robe, another drew warm water, a third washed the feet, murmuring prayers all the while. The air smelled of wax and herbs. The walls held the echoes of centuries of such moments. And in Jewish communities, the tahara was practiced. This was the ritual washing of the dead, done by a sacred society. Men for men, women for women. It was performed with the utmost care. The body was washed thoroughly, dried, and dressed in simple white garments. No makeup, no jewelry, just purity. Silence was maintained throughout. It was not just respectful, it was holy. Every splash of water was part of a prayer. There was no fear in this, only care. You might imagine now a woman kneeling beside the body of her mother, slowly pouring water over her hands. She does not cry loudly. She moves deliberately. There is comfort in the rhythm, the repetition. When she braids the silver hair, her fingers remember the same gesture from childhood. When she wraps the body in linen, she tucks it in gently, as if for sleep. When all is done, candles are lit. One at the head, one at the foot. These burn through the night, their light flickering across the softened features of the face. Someone keeps vigil, reading prayers, humming a hymn, whispering aloud into the dark. A vigil is not loud, it is quiet, like everything else in these final rituals, and in the morning, the burial. The body is carried on a simple board or in a wooden coffin, often built by hand. Friends follow, neighbors walk beside. The grave is ready, dug by those who knew the person. Earth is returned to earth. The final cloth is lowered gently as it was laid on the bed in life. And when it is done, hands are washed again, this time with water and herbs, to mark the ending, to step back into the world of the living. The cloths used are rinsed in a stream. The room is swept. The candle stubs are saved. Life continues gently. And you, dear listener, lying now in your own quiet, may wonder why we lingered here, why this chapter in the tale of medieval cleanliness should be about death. But the truth is, death too is part of life, and the way a person is cleaned in death tells you how they were loved in life. There is no greater honor than to be touched gently, even in the end, to be remembered not with noise, but with water and cloth and care. And perhaps now, as you lie in stillness wrapped in your own blanket, soothed by the hush of night, you feel a kind of quiet kinship with those long gone, those who lit candles for the dead, who warmed water before the last bath, who folded cloth with slow, reverent hands. In the end, it is all part of the same rhythm. The combing of hair, the scrubbing of floors, the folding of linen, the washing of the dead, All of it says I was here, I mattered, I cared. The world is utterly quiet now. The kind of quiet that feels sacred, as though the very air is holding its breath. You lie still beneath your blanket, your breath moving softly, evenly, like the gentle roll of distant hills under moonlight. And while your body rests, your mind continues its slow, easy journey through the unnoticed rituals of medieval life. A journey of cloth and water, of hands and time, of small, steady gestures in a world long gone, but never far away. Tonight, we follow one final thread, one that stretches through all we've seen, tying every act of care and cleanliness together. The home itself. Not just the people, not just their clothing, or their bodies, or the rituals of life and death, but the very space they lived in. The walls, the floors, the corners and thresholds. We turn now to the gentle rhythmic labour of keeping the medieval home clean. Such as it was, and what that truly meant. Close your eyes if you haven't already. You are in a modest timber-framed house. The roof thatches overhead are dark with age. The hearth glows softly, embers whispering, a pot hanging from the iron hook above the fire. It is a home that breathes with the people who live in it. Nothing is pristine. Nothing is perfect. But everything has its place. Each morning begins with small movements. Someone stirs the ashes, breathes life into the fire. Water is fetched, bucket after bucket, from the village well or nearby stream. This water is not just for drinking. It will be used to rinse, to scrub, to soak, to sprinkle on dusty floors. Beside the hearth, a woman kneels with a bundle of twigs, sweeping the packed earth floor. The bristles are rough, bundled hazel or birch, tied tight with cord, but they do the job. Dust stirs in the morning light, dancing through the air before it settles again. Medieval homes were not dirty because people didn't care. They were dirty because the world itself was dirtier. Smoke clung to everything. People tracked in mud. Livestock shared walls with their owners. The wind brought in soot, pollen, and straw. But against all of it, there was effort. A broom made from reeds. A cloth soaked in vinegar. A hand smoothing down a wooden bench. The floors are not scrubbed, but swept. Hard-packed earth, or stone if the house is wealthy. Sometimes covered in rushes, long grasses, reeds, or even straw laid down in layers. These rushes are not random. They're gathered with care, sometimes mixed with herbs to sweeten the air. Meadowsweet, thyme, chamomile. The floor is replaced when it gets too foul. The top layer swept away, the bottom compressed into the earth. A soft, fragrant bed beneath your feet. The windows are small, with oiled parchment instead of glass. They're wiped down with rags or left alone. When it rains, the wind seeps through the cracks. Damp is inevitable. So people open shutters when the sun shines, let the air move through. A kind of cleansing that requires no tools, only time. Walls, when they are stone, are whitewashed. This is not decorative, it's practical. Lime wash resists pests, brightens the dark interior, and offers a sense of freshness even when nothing else feels new. It is reapplied with a broad brush, its scent sharp and clean, stinging slightly in the nose. Children might help. It is a day's work. A kind of renewal. The wooden beams and doors are wiped with cloths soaked in vinegar or ale. Not daily, But when needed, soot is scraped from the hearth's stones, cobwebs brushed down with bundled twigs. The home is watched, tended, not obsessively, but with steady attention, and every object within it has its turn under the cloth. The wooden table, worn smooth with time, is wiped down with a damp rag after meals. It's rubbed with a bit of fat to keep it from cracking in winter. The cups, bowls and spoons are rinsed in buckets or shallow basins. Wooden ware that never quite loses the scent of the meals it's held. If someone is especially careful, they might leave their bowls in the sun to dry and bleach. Laundry days, too, become part of this rhythm. The wet smell of soap root and boiling water, the steam curling from large pots, the sound of cloth being slapped against stones, the dull thud of wringing arms, the soft snap of linen being shaken before it's hung. These sounds fill the home. They are the heartbeat of cleanliness. And scents linger in the home. Not all pleasant, but many familiar. The hearth's smoke ever present. The sharp tang of vinegar used for scrubbing. The warm, musky scent of dried herbs hanging from rafters. The waxy smell of rushlights burning low, even sweat leather tallow. These mingle into the background, forming the signature scent of a lived-in medieval house. Earthy, real, close. In the more spacious homes of the nobility, cleanliness becomes a symbol. Tapestries are beaten outdoors in the sun. Floors are covered in woven mats or painted tiles. Servants air out chambers, shake out feather-stuffed mattresses, brush cloaks and gowns until the fabric gleams. Hot coals are placed in metal pans to warm and deodorize. Incense is burned, not just for holiness, but for fragrance. Still, beneath all the grandeur, the same labor remains. The same cloth wiping the same dust from the same wooden sill. Children are taught early to help. A young boy holds a broom half his size. A girl drizzles vinegar over the doorstep to keep ants away. It is not punishment, it is participation, a way of being part of the rhythm of the household. And every week, just as the Sabbath approaches, the home is quieted, the beds are smoothed, the floor is swept once more, the kettle is polished, the fire is banked just so. Even if the outer world is wild, the inside becomes still. A place to return to, a space that says, here we have done what we can. Here we are safe. And perhaps now, your own space feels something like that. Maybe the day has passed, the lights are dimmed and the air is still. You know the comfort of sheets pulled tight, the quiet hum of clean surroundings. You understand, in your own way, that cleanliness is not just about dust or soap or effort. It's about returning, again and again, to a space that reflects care, thought, peace. The people of the Middle Ages may not have had the words we use now, but they understood what a clean space could offer. Not pride, not show, but rest. Let yourself drift now, softly, in the echo of these rituals. The broom across the floor, the linen hung to dry, the fire swept clean, the child setting down a folded cloth, proud. All of these moments, like yours now, are acts of care, of presence, of preparation for stillness. The hush tonight is deeper still, velvety, like a well-worn cloak draped over your shoulders. All around, the world has fallen into its quiet rhythm. No footsteps echo, no tools scrape, no voices carry through the lanes. just the sound of the breeze shifting softly outside, like a lullaby for the old bones of the earth. You remain at rest, wrapped in stillness, still travelling through the quiet corridors of the Middle Ages, guided by small, deliberate acts of care. We have explored the cleaning of bodies, of clothing, of spaces, and of rituals surrounding both life and death. Now, in this next chapter, we arrive at something more subtle, less physical perhaps, but no less essential to medieval life. We look now at the ways in which time itself was cleaned, how people marked, prepared for, and honoured seasonal transitions through ritual cleanliness. It may not seem obvious at first, but to those who lived close to the land, each season carried not only its own labours, but its own form of cleansing. The arrival of spring, for example, was not just the end of winter. It was a sweeping out, a return, a time to open up both the home and the body, to shake off the heaviness of cold months and invite in warmth, light, and air. Spring cleaning is older than the phrase we know today. As winter faded, hearths were cleared of soot that had built up in long, smoky months. Ashes were carted to gardens and scattered among bare soil. Windows, small as they were unlatched and propped open. The air inside homes, thick with smoke and breath and animal musk, was finally given a chance to move. Rushes on the floors were removed entirely, not just replaced, but swept out altogether. Beneath them, months of crumbs, hair, and dust had collected, packed into the earth. Now they were scooped into baskets and taken far from the home. New rushes were cut, fresh, green, fragrant, and laid down again, each stem carefully positioned. Some homes scattered mint or sweet woodruff among the rushes, hoping the scent would linger. Even tools were cleaned, scythes were oiled, hoes were scrubbed, shears were sharpened and wiped down. These, too, had waited through the dark. Now they were made ready. For a household to function well in the coming months, it had to begin again, not just in work, but in spirit. And so bodies were prepared too. Herbal tonics were brewed. Dandelion root, nettles, and cleavers were steeped to cleanse the blood, a phrase used often in medieval texts. It wasn't a medical term as we use it today, but a belief that the sluggishness of winter, of heavy food, still limbs, stale air, could be lifted, lightened. People would sweat in bathhouses or in warm linens beside the fire, believing that illness and gloom would exit the body with the sweat. Hair was trimmed, beards reshaped, clothes aired out or washed. Even walls were sometimes repainted with limewash to brighten and freshen a space. Chickens were let out more often. Sheep were sheared early in the season, and the wool, before carding or spinning, was soaked, rinsed and hung like long blankets on hedges and fences. And beyond spring, other seasons carried their own patterns of cleansing. Before harvest in late summer, homes were cleaned again, not with the thoroughness of spring, but with the purpose of making space. Grains would be brought in. Barley, rye, wheat, all needed dry places to be stored. The rooms where tools were kept were dusted and emptied, swept, then filled with the fruits of labour. In the autumn, as the days shortened, the hearth became the heart of the home once more. Soot would build quickly, so it was cleaned often. Chimneys, where they existed, were scraped. Pothooks and irons were polished. Food stores were checked for spoilage. Herbs that had dried through the summer were now crumbled and sorted, placed in jars, sacks, or pouches. The idea of cleaning was not just for health. It was a kind of resetting. Even spiritually, it mattered. At Lent, before Easter, the Church encouraged not only fasting but penance, cleansing of the soul, confession, reflection. But there was also a physical echo of this, a tidying of personal life, bathing when one could, wearing simpler garments, scrubbing one's hands, face, and feet before the Easter feast, a kind of preparation. Similarly, before Michaelmas in late September, a feast marking the end of harvest, people prepared by cleaning homes, baking, brewing, and sharing what they had. Even preparing the goose, a traditional Michaelmas dish, began with careful plucking, washing, and seasoning, acts of cleanliness in their own right. The year moved through these moments like pages in a well-thumbed book, each with its own scent, its own sound, its own pattern of care. And now you too have seasons. Maybe you don't think of them as such, but you do. The changing of your wardrobe, the washing of windows after a long winter, the clearing out of drawers, the airing of quilts, the sorting of jars in a quiet kitchen. You might light a candle when the days grow shorter. You might open your windows on the first warm day of spring. These are not chores. They are rituals. You do not need to hurry through them. You can move slowly, like those before you. You are part of a rhythm that has never stopped, that never needed to. Let yourself feel that now, not in a grand way, just gently, the way the wind shifts when it turns from winter to spring, the way sunlight rests on a clean floor, the way fresh sheets feel after a long day. Time too can be cleaned, not to be made perfect, just made ready, made soft again, made quiet. So now, as the night folds itself around you like a blanket warmed by the hearth, remember that you belong to a long tradition of quiet stewards, of people who swept and wiped and washed not for pride or vanity, but because they understood that stillness lives best in clean spaces. That rest is earned in little ways. The rushes are fresh beneath your feet. The season has shifted again. The hour is late now. The kind of late when time no longer feels like it moves forward, but rather folds in on itself, like layers of linen tucked into a quiet chest. The darkness outside has ripened fully, rich and undisturbed. Not even the smallest echo dares to rise above a whisper. It is here, in this deep quiet, that we continue. Not rushing, never rushing, just drifting further into the gentle, forgotten habits of medieval life, still following the thread of care and cleanliness, still tracing the soft lines between ritual and rest. Tonight, we follow that thread into the most humble and yet most essential space in the medieval world, the kitchen. Yes, the kitchen, though you must imagine it not as a separate room tucked behind a closed door, gleaming with countertops and appliances. No, in the medieval home, the kitchen was the heart, sometimes a separate building in the wealthiest estates, but more often simply a corner of the main room. A hearth, a hook, a table, and at the center of it all, the fire. Let your mind settle there now. Beside that hearth, the coals are low but warm. The pot that hung above them has been scrubbed and set to rest. The smell of herbs still lingers faintly in the air. bay leaves, parsley, onion skin, a trace of smoke. The room glows with the soft remains of labour. Stacked bowls, clean wooden, spoons, cloths drying near the warmth. Cleaning a medieval kitchen was never complete in the modern sense. Not in the way of bleach and shine, but it was cleaned nonetheless. By hand, by habit, by knowing what needed to be done. At the end of every meal, the pot was scoured, not with soap, as we know it, but with ash from the fire, mixed with water. Ash acts as a mild abrasive. A handful was swirled inside the pot, scraping the bottom with a bit of rough cloth or even straw. The pot was then rinsed with fresh water, if fresh water could be spared, and wiped dry. Iron pots, if left wet, would rust, so they were dried thoroughly, then sometimes rubbed with fat or ash to preserve the surface. The wooden spoons, ladles, and bowls were also rinsed, rarely in running water, more often in a basin that might have been reused several times that day. If grease remained, hot water was poured carefully, ladled from the kettle or warmed by the fire. The wood was scrubbed with coarse cloths or fingers, then dried beside the hearth. Plates, when used, were often made of wood, or sometimes of hardened bread, called trenchers. These bread trenchers would soak up juices and oils and could be eaten after the meal or given to the poor. In this way, even the cleaning of dishes became a ritual of generosity. Breadboards were wiped with vinegar, knives were rinsed, then rubbed with a bit of cloth to keep rust away. The salt cellar was covered with cloth to keep it dry. Cheesecloths were rinsed and hung over a beam to dry in the warm air above the hearth. Nothing was left soaking. Nothing could be left unattended. Every object had to be prepared for the next use, for nothing came easily. And then there was the sweeping. Beneath the table, bits of flour, breadcrumbs, onion skins, all swept with a bundle of twigs or a handmade broom. The floor was earthen, packed and cool, but still swept daily, if not more, and where straw or rushes were spread, the top layer was gathered carefully. Sometimes it was burned, sometimes carried to the compost pile or pigsty. In its place, fresh cuttings were laid down, dry, soft, fragrant. Spills were not mopped, but scattered with dry earth or old cloth. The cloths were shaken out near the door, then rinsed when water was available. In more affluent homes, the kitchen was a building unto itself, and the cleaning was divided among workers. There was the spit boy, who cleaned the iron rotisserie with salt and cloth, the scullery maid, who boiled water for soaking pots, the pantler, who saw to the storage of bread, the butler, who kept the drink room in order. But even here, among hierarchy and station, cleanliness was a task shared, expected, quietly enforced, by rhythm more than by rule. And what of the pantries? The cellars? There, too, the rules of care and order reigned. Cheese was wrapped in cloths and stored on wooden shelves, turned every so often to prevent mould. Butter was kept in earthenware jars and rinsed with cool water. Grains were stored in barrels, checked for insects, stirred to keep air flowing. Even in winter, someone would rise early to check the stores, lift the lids, smell for spoilage. A way of keeping the home from illness, from hunger. In homes with root cellars, the air was cool and damp, but not still. Vegetables were stored in straw, apples wrapped in cloth and laid in rows. And when something went bad, It was removed carefully, wrapped in more straw, and carried far away. The smell of rot was feared, not just for the scent, but for what it brought: flies, sickness, decay. So people cleaned, quietly, daily, without thinking of it as noble. It was simply what needed doing. They didn't have soap as we do, but they knew how to purify with vinegar, with boiling, with sunlight. They didn't have disinfectants, but they knew the sharp scent of rosemary and sage, the usefulness of lye, the power of salt. They dried herbs not just for flavour, but to hang above the kitchen hearth as guardians of air and breath. Sometimes, especially before feasts, the cleaning became ceremony. The hearthstones were scrubbed, the wooden table washed, the pitcher polished, flowers brought in from the fields. Even the cat was brushed and shooed from the pantry. It was a moment of pause before abundance, a way of making the space sacred. And even after death, kitchens were cleaned. A widow, standing alone in the quiet of her hearth, would sweep the same corners she had swept for years, wipe the table once more, fold the cloth her husband had used. The act of cleaning was, in its way, a form of mourning, a way of saying life continues, the kitchen still waits. So perhaps now you understand, dear listener, why this space matters so much, why it belongs in our quiet tale of medieval cleanliness. Because the kitchen, whether a grand hall with servants or a single fire in a tiny cottage, was always the heart. It was where warmth lived, where food began, where care was, practiced in the most invisible ways. And you, resting now, have known that feeling. You've wiped down a counter in silence, let steam rise from a pot and fog the windows, folded a towel and smoothed its edge. These are not chores. These are soft rituals, old as time. They are how we say, this place matters. This moment is real. I am here. So breathe deeply now, Dido. The scent of wood smoke and herbs drift through your imagination. Let the sound of a broom against stone echo faintly in your mind. Let your thoughts settle like flour in a quiet bowl. The kitchen is clean. The fire is banked. The cloth is folded. The fire is low now, just a dull amber beneath the coals, glowing softly like the last ember of a long, slow dream. Outside, the moon has slipped behind a cloud, and the wind barely stirs the leaves. All is still. You, too, are still, warm beneath your blanket, your breath slow and even. The world of waking fading like smoke into the quiet folds of sleep. And yet, we continue gently forward, drifting deeper into the rhythms of medieval life, where the act of staying clean, of keeping clean, was not only physical, but profoundly personal. Tonight, we turn our attention inward. We look now at something quieter than scrubbing pots or washing feet. We explore the art of personal grooming in the Middle Ages, not vanity, but quiet maintenance. The care of hair, skin, nails, the small regular gestures that defined how a person carried themselves in a time when mirrors were rare and time itself moved like honey. Let your eyes remain closed. Let your limbs grow heavy. Let your thoughts meander softly back in time. You are in a small room, lit only by a single beeswax candle. The flame flickers gently, casting long shadows along rough-hewn wooden walls. Beside you is a stool, a bowl of warm water and a cloth carefully folded. This is not a bath day. This is not a festival. This is just the ordinary work of caring for the self. Quiet, regular, necessary. Hair in the Middle Ages was not just hair. It was part of one's identity, deeply tied to culture, gender, age, and piety. For women, hair was often long, carefully, braided and, if married, almost always covered in public. But in private, there was time. Time to untie the braids, to comb slowly, starting at the ends, working upward. Combs were often made of wood, bone, or horn, the teeth set wide apart to draw through thick, tangled locks. Some women perfumed their combs with lavender or rose petals. Others dusted their hair with fine powders made from herbs and crushed flowers. If oil was available, olive, walnut, or even animal fat, it was warmed slightly and rubbed into the scalp with the fingertips. Not for shine, but to soothe dryness, to keep the hair supple, to calm the skin. These grooming sessions were often quiet affairs, done at dusk or early morning, sometimes shared between sisters or mothers and daughters. One would sit between the knees of another, and the comb would move slowly, gently, like a lullaby in motion. No rush, no chatter, just the faint crackle of the fire and the soft drag of wood through hair. Men, too, cared for their hair and beards. Knights and farmers alike carried small grooming kits, often tucked into pouches at their belts. A comb, a small knife for trimming nails, sometimes a scrap of cloth for wiping the face. Beards were oiled if the man could afford it, otherwise trimmed with care, not into sharp lines, but softened edges, clean but not vain. A man in the monastery might be tonsured, his head shaved in the crown, marking his devotion. This was done not once, but regularly. A monk would sit before another, head bowed, while the other moved the blade slowly across his scalp, pausing to wipe it clean. The gesture was quiet, sacred, not just about hair, but about humility. And then there were the nails, trimmed not with scissors, but with knives, carefully. One hand pressed to the table, the small blade scraping gently across the edge of the nail. Not for fashion, but for cleanliness. Dirty nails were a sign of neglect. Not always shameful, labour left its mark, but if time allowed, one cleaned them, with the tip of a knife, with a bit of twine, with a damp cloth. Some women painted their nails with herbal dyes, not brightly, but softly. A tint of henna, a touch of elderberry. Not often, not boldly, just a whisper of colour, like a secret only they knew. And then the skin. In a world without lotions or creams as we know them, people turned to what they had: honey, animal fats, egg yolk, herbs, water infused with chamomile or milk. These were mixed and applied to the face, the hands, the feet. Calluses softened with warm vinegar soaks, rough elbows rubbed with lard, lips soothed with beeswax and rose oil, if one was lucky. People spent more time outdoors then. Their skin was weathered, sun-darkened, wind-chapped, cracked from cold. So the act of smoothing balm onto the face at night was more than cosmetic. It was comfort, survival, a pause at the end of the day, and don't forget the teeth. Contrary to popular myth, medieval people did care for them. Twigs were chewed into frayed brushes. cloths used to wipe the mouth. Herbs like mint, sage and parsley chewed to freshen breath. Some even used powdered salt or ground charcoal to polish the teeth, though it could wear enamel if used too often. These methods were crude by today's standards, but they were mindful, regular, personal. A merchant, before meeting clients, might rub a mint leaf across his tongue. A bride, the night before her wedding, might soak her cloth in sage water and rub her teeth until they gleamed. These were small, private acts, but full of intention. And the eyes, bathed with rose water, or wiped gently with a cloth dipped in milk. If eyes were red from smoke or strain, slices of cool cucumber or cloths soaked in cold spring water were laid over them. It didn't always help, but the act itself, the pause, the stillness, was part of the healing. And when all was done, hair combed, nails trimmed, skin soothed, teeth wiped, the cloths were rinsed and laid over the edge of the basin, the tools placed back in their pouch or drawer. The room fell silent again, the candlelight flickering against a face now calm, eyes half closed in rest. You may wonder now, lying in your bed, what this has to do with you. But you know the answer, don't you? You've felt it before, after a long bath, after brushing your hair in silence, after washing your face and smoothing cream across your skin. You know what it means to care for your body with no one watching. Not for praise, not for appearance, but for peace. You, like them, are not just skin and bone. You are routine, memory, ritual. And in those quiet acts, stroking a comb through your hair, rinsing your face in warm water, softening your lips with balm, you are not alone. You are part of an ancient rhythm, a lineage of quiet care stretching back centuries. They too felt weary at the end of the day. They too took comfort in the way a cloth moved over the brow, the way oil warmed in the palm, the way the world faded just a little with each pass of the comb. So let your own breath slow now, let your limbs grow heavy, your thoughts dim. You are clean, you are tended, you are part of something quiet, slow and everlasting. The night is now at its softest. Everything beyond your room has gone still. No creaking carts, no barking dogs, no distant bells. Just the faint rhythm of your breath, steady and low. The warmth of your blanket cradles you like layers of old wool, and your mind drifts gently, still tethered to the world we've been exploring. A world built on quiet gestures, on care, on the slow, deliberate dance between life and the spaces we shape to live it in. Tonight, we step outside again, just a little, not into the chaos of markets or battlefields, but into something smaller, closer. We turn our gaze to the objects of personal use in the Middle Ages. The intimate tools and possessions that helped a person keep clean. The comb in the pouch, the washing cloth in the cupboard, the basin tucked near the fire. These were not objects of luxury. They were humble, worn, sometimes homemade, but they were kept, carried, used and repaired. They were part of a person's daily life. Often the only possessions someone could truly call their own. Let your thoughts slow. Let your breathing fall into rhythm with the ancient past. Imagine a simple wooden comb. It is not ornate. It is carved from a pale piece of ash or boxwood, smoothed over time by constant touch. One side has thick teeth for knots, the other finer for smoothing. It lives in a pouch, often wrapped in a piece of cloth scented faintly with dried lavender. It is used daily, carefully, methodically, on hair that may not be washed often, but is still respected. The act of combing was more than tidiness. It was believed to stimulate the scalp, to promote balance, even to ward off illness. A person in a monastery might be required to comb their hair at certain hours. In noble households, combs were made of ivory, bone, or even precious metals, but their purpose was the same: order, soothing, care. And now a basin, simple pottery or hammered brass, cool to the touch. It sits near the hearth or on a shelf, used not for full bathing, but for the daily splash to the face, the rinsing of hands, the wiping of weary feet after a long walk. Water is poured into it from a jug, a careful act, measured and precious. These basins were often shared. A family might have only one, but each person had their moment with it, their routine, a cloth dampened, a face wiped, a moment of private stillness in a shared world. And then the cloth itself, linen often, or hemp, coarsely woven for the poor, more refined for the wealthy. Not bleached, not coloured, just simple cloth, soft with use, folded and kept in a chest or hung to dry by the fire. It would be used for everything: drying the body, wiping a pot, soaking a sore foot. These cloths were patched again and again. You might find one with 5, 6, even 10 repairs, each one a quiet testimony to its value. And what of the belt? Pouch? Inside it a man or woman might keep a knife, not just for eating, but for trimming nails, splitting reeds, sharpening quills. A tiny flask of oil if they were fortunate. A lump of lye soap wrapped in waxed cloth. Maybe a little mirror, polished metal, not glass, just enough to catch the shape of a face. These were the grooming kits of medieval life. Not kits in the modern sense, just bits and pieces kept close, used often, maintained with care. For women, a spindle might be kept nearby too. Spinning was not only labour, it was meditative, repetitive, clean work. Fibres ran through fingers washed with herbs. Hands were kept smooth to avoid catching on the thread. You might see a woman spinning quietly in the corner, her feet bare on a swept floor, a basin of cool water nearby to rinse her palms when the work was done. Children had their tools as well, a small comb, a cloth for wiping hands before meals. No toys as we know them, but a worn rag doll might be scrubbed in the basin, gently pressed dry, set in the sun. Children learned from their elders how to fold cloth, how to rinse a dish, how to sweep the floor without stirring too much dust. The simplicity of these items belied their importance. Each was a part of the daily ritual of cleanliness. Not perfection, but intention. You didn't need 10 of something, just one. One you trusted, one you knew. And then there were the more curious tools. Toothpicks carved from bone or hardwood. Tweezers used not just for grooming, but for removing thorns or splinters. Ear scoops. Tiny spoons of metal or horn, used carefully and rarely. Even the wealthy didn't use such items often, but they existed. Small reminders that, even in the past, people paid attention to the body's finer details. You might picture, now, a woman kneeling beside her bed, dipping a cloth in warm water, wiping her feet slowly before slipping them under the covers. Or a man sitting on a stool after a long day, running a comb through his hair by firelight, lost in thought. The tools are nearby, close at hand, close to heart. Because in the medieval world, where illness and hardship were never far, these small objects offered a sense of control, of care, of comfort. They did not promise beauty. They promised familiarity, repetition, a moment of calm in a world that rarely stood still. Perhaps your own nightstand holds something similar. A bottle of lotion, a brush, a cloth, not because you expect to be seen, but because it brings peace, because it signals the body that the day is over, that you've done what you could, that you are home. And so, as you lie here now, warmed by the hush of sleep, you are not so far from them. You, too, keep your little tools. You, too, rinse your hands, comb your hair, wipe your face, not to be perfect, but to feel whole, clean, quiet. So rest now. Let the basin cool beside the fire. Let the cloths dry on the rail. Let the comb rest in its pouch. The night has settled in. There is nothing more to do. Only to breathe. Only to be. The night is almost over now. Not in a hurried way, but in that slow, inevitable rhythm the world has always known. The stars have wheeled gently above us as we walked, one soft step at a time, through a forgotten world of water, ash combs, cloths and care. And here we are, dear listener, at the final chapter of our quiet journey. One last stretch of road through the darkened countryside of the Middle Ages, where life was slower, earthier, and cleanliness was less about sparkle and more about survival and softness. Let yourself rest more deeply now. The air in your room is still. The weight of the day has dissolved, like steam rising from a basin left cooling on a windowsill. You are ready, not just to sleep, but to let go of the waking world for a while. To step softly, one final time, into that past we've come to know. We've seen the comb drawn through unwashed hair with care. We've watched cloths dipped in cold spring water, hands rubbed with vinegar and herbs, floors swept with bundles of reeds. We've stood by hearths scrubbed with ash, smelled the faint sweetness of drying rushes, and heard the hush of bread trenchers being cleared and wiped down. We've walked slowly, without judgment, through lives where even the simplest acts of cleanliness were full of meaning. And now we pause. We stand quietly at the threshold of a new day, just as a medieval villager might have done. Barefoot on a worn stone step, the air crisp, a bucket of water in hand. There is dew on the ground, birds rustle in the thatch. But for this moment, everything is still. Because cleanliness, you see, was never just about scrubbing or rinsing. It was not about being free from dirt. It was about being at peace in your space, being present with yourself, creating small moments of dignity in a world that often gave so little. In illness, clean sheets were a mercy. In mourning, a freshly scrubbed floor was a way to say, "We go on." In poverty, a simple wash of the face before prayers could restore a sense of worth. And in joy, there was the delight of putting on a linen tunic that had dried in the sun, of wiping your hands on a cloth someone else had folded for you, of washing your feet before stepping into bed beside a loved one, under a roof that barely kept the weather out. but still felt like home. So perhaps now, with the whole journey behind you, you understand the quiet beauty of it. Medieval people were not dirty by choice. They were clean by intention, not always able to wash fully, but always making do, always caring, always finding meaning in the act of sweeping, wiping, soaking, airing, dusting, combing, and washing, over and over again, not because the dirt would ever truly go away, but because these gestures gave them a way to push back against the chaos of the world. You do the same. Every time you fold laundry, wipe your sink, trim your nails, or sweep the corner of a room, you're part of that same ancient rhythm, the same sacred pattern. Cleanliness as comfort, cleanliness as ritual, cleanliness as care. So as the final candle gutters out in your imagination, and the hearth grows cool, and the bowl is emptied and set aside, you can let go now. You've seen what there is to see. You've felt what there is to feel. The story is complete, and your bed, like those centuries ago, is ready. The floor beneath you has been swept. The cloth is folded and still faintly warm. The water is clean, and you are at rest. Thank you for walking with me. Slowly, tenderly, through the forgotten textures of the past, through earth and ash and herbs, through effort and simplicity, through the quiet heart of what it meant to be clean. Now sleep, let the dream begin.